So if you think, well, why should I care? I've got money, super fast broadband, no illnesses, no diabetes, nothing going on. First of all, if you think that, you need to have a word with yourself. But everyone can be affected by this. And this is where we're going to expand the conversation and bring in Emily Taylor, who's many things: CEO of Oxford InfoLab, Associate Fellow at Chatham House, and key to this part of this new special on the Colin Murray Show, editor of the Journal of Cyber Policy and an international cybersecurity expert. Barely time to talk about the subject with that amount of jobs, Emily. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thanks for having me on this evening.
Talk to me about the information already held, the information that's already growing, that's held by banks about each and every one of us.
Well, there's a lot of information out there. The digital age is just full of data, and whether it's banks or governments or social media platforms, we're awash with data. And so everything that we do online leaves a trace, a sort of digital footprint. And you see, I'm sure you've experienced that, you're buying something online or nearly buying something, and then you, for whatever reason, don't complete the transaction. Suddenly you're followed around by the, whatever you nearly bought wherever you go. And that's because there are all sorts of businesses and institutions watching us. Now, the financial sector has been, very active in trying to up our cybersecurity of payments, but it's still the case that that we don't really. When something goes wrong with our bank, or if there's a hack or cybercrime, we don't actually pay the price of that. And so I think we feel that it's a lot safer than it really is in practice.
Yeah. Here's the twist. If you've got 50 quid in your bank account right now and mass cyber attack causes a mass fraud at a major bank, you're only going to be 50 quid down. If you're listening now and you get 600 grand in your bank account, yeah, you're going to be more affected by this. And this is why it should involve everyone. We should care anyway without that caveat, by the way, but it will affect everyone. Cyber attacks during COVID-19 against banks, according to a recent report, Emily, there's been a 238% increase. Is there an element of it's much more difficult to commit fraud with cash? Certainly mass fraud.
I think that the big difference between the online world and offline is that just the scale and reach of online is much greater. So, say if you were doing some kind of email scam, fairly low tech, I guess, you could, compared to being, say, a car thief or something like that, if you said to a car thief, well, you're going to have to smash 1 million car windows before you get a good stereo back in the day, they'd go, oh, I don't really fancy it. But actually, like everything, online reduces transaction costs and furthers your reach and all of that. So it's actually quite worth it to have a 1 in a million chance of a hit if you're a cyber criminal, because if you send enough billions of messages out there, you could actually make some good money. And your chances of getting caught are much lower than they are in real life.
Emily, what does freedom of cash mean? Talk a little bit about that.
Freedom of cash isn't something I've really come across, but one thing that a story that we had in the journal, an article last year, it was sort of really just questioning this idea that all criminals are using Bitcoin. And the author, Simon Butler, was really saying that actually in the world of the criminal, cash is still king, even though it's got lots of problems. It's quite heavy to transport around. So £1 million in £20 notes weighs 50 kilograms. So, the size of a small person. But still, the majority of criminal, like money laundering and so on, is not actually currently being done in cryptocurrencies and all these sort of high tech things like that.
The fact is that a lot of major banks, I can list them now, have had software go down. The networks have gone down. We put ourselves in a situation, Emily, if we go even further towards a cashless society, that creates a monopoly, and monopolies usually create extra costs for the consumer. This is we can look at so many examples.
Yeah. That is absolutely right. And it's across the board. As we become more and more reliant on technology, when it goes wrong, it's a real disaster. And, just a kind of straw poll of friends and family and work colleagues, particularly the younger generations, they don't even particularly like using cash, but they don't use cash very much. Like my daughter went out to the shops the other day. She doesn't even bring her wallet with her. She just relies on her phone. And, so if your phone even runs out of battery when you're in the supermarket or something like that, suddenly you're without the means to pay. And I think that, as Natalie and your other speakers have pointed out, we're reliant on cash in more ways than we think. And particularly for those transactions, like somebody sending you money in a card, it's just nice, or giving to charity or collections, or just having a bit of cash stashed away, like your listener just now, just in case. All of these things are, you miss them when they're gone.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's the most marginalised in societies who really are the most affected when these things change.
100%. Emily Taylor, thank you so much for adding another layer to this conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you for being in the BBC tonight.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Natalie, so much, and I look at the clock with a couple more people to come in. Let me run through some texts with you. Mike says, and we always look at every side of the coin, if you text in respectfully to us, we'll read it out, we'll have the conversation. That's the rule of the show. And Mike respectfully says, I think you're missing the point. I ran a branch network for a major bank for 10 years. Customers barely use branches. They like digital, and contactless use has plummeted. I know what I would say. That was bring Natalie in on that first.
For most people, that's true, but not all. So it's back to that 17% of people who actually need cash. And that's the population who need bank branches. They often feel quite unsafe using an ATM on the street. That's the surveys we did for the Access Cash Review. If you're physically vulnerable, actually you prefer to go to a counter. Perhaps you're visually impaired. Talking to a real person who can hand over the money, help you count it, makes you feel an awful lot safer than on a busy street at an ATM. So the problem is, again, we're talking about the majority are fine. Yeah, but there's 20% who aren't. And that's a lot of people in Britain.
Huge
and surely we want a society that includes everybody.
Mike, I say two things, really, especially given this century and the absolute mountain of our money that saved banks. Do banks not have an obligation to look after all of their customers and where they are? Because that doesn't sound like a two-way street to me. And there's Mike, there's an assess well respect you, my friend. Thanks for texting in. There's a Bill Hicks sketch that comes to mind when he's talking about going to war against a country who have weapons. And the bigger country says, well, I absolutely know that you had weapons in the smoke. But he says, how do you know? And he says, we sold them to you. We checked the receipts. And there's an element of, well, it's created this situation. It's created digital and contactless. It's created ways for people who have the luxury of that, like myself, to use it. But why then can you take 17% of the market and say, well, to hell with you? Streamlining, yes, but if you actually look at the facts that we have here, Michael, ATMs are closing at, and Natalie, we did the figures, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds every month, 50 branches closing down, and people just can't get the money, and those same people are in vulnerable groups who aren't able to. I've got really intelligent friends who are of an older age who just don't have the wherewithal or the eyesight, or just are a different generation, Natalie, to use a smartphone.
Yeah, and let me give you a couple of examples, because I think often people think, oh, it's a choice. People could just go digital if they want. Well, domestic abuse victims, which has got quite a lot of profile during COVID. If you're a victim of domestic abuse, often your partner takes over your bank account. So domestic abuse victims often need cash to squirrel away that small amount of money to maybe feed the kids or even try and save up an escape. Mental health charities have told us that actually people who've got long-term mental health issues often don't trust themselves to be completely reliant on digital payments, because if they have a manic episode, they could blow their entire savings in one go. And then let's imagine someone who's got bank accounts, got cards, but they're vulnerable and they're shielding for ill health.
Yeah.
And they rely on someone doing their shopping. Now, what do we want them to be doing? Handing over, say, a £20 note, or handing over their debit card, where someone could go and basically empty their bank account? These are examples where people have no choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's bring in Alan Smith and Chris Brooks. We started with first-hand stories, and I'd like to just push forward how this is right now. And this is as we have this massive push fueled by COVID-19, and it's been used to a certain extent. It's been taken advantage of just how we're seeing the most vulnerable threatened. And we got to ask ourselves: is this is our society? Don't even ask ourselves, just the reality that this is our society that we're part of, and maybe we need to be more active to change that. Alan Smith is here. He's the Centre Coordinator and Advocate Officer at Wirral Society for the Blind. Hi, Alan.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Really good. Thanks for being on, and thanks for being part of the conversation. And Chris Brooks is Head of Policy at Age UK. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Colin. Good evening.
Good evening. Alan, this is what you see. This is what you see firsthand, the effect of this.
Yes, indeed. Yep.